In order to connect the backend, the user creation route we just created to the front end, I'll go to the auth folder. Here we get a couple of files, but what we haven't got right now is a service for our authentication components here, for our authentication feature. So I will create a new file and name it authservice.ts. Here I will create a new service which I'll use to sign up a user, sign in a user, and do all these things. So here it's time to export a class of service like this. And in here, what I want to do is I want to create a sign up method, which allows me to, guess what, sign up a user. Therefore here, I will pass a user object of type user to this method. Of course, you need to import the user from ./user.model from this file where we define how our user should look like on our front end. So in here, I get this user passed into my auth service. I want to reach out to my backend thereafter. Therefore, I need to inject the HTTP service. And as you learned in the messages section in this course here, for this to work, I need to add injectable to this service here. This makes sure I can inject a service into a service. You need to import injectable from @Angular core, like this. This now allows me to add a constructor to this service, and in the constructor I want to store the HTTP service of Angular in this HTTP property. So make sure to import HTTP here from @Angular HTTP. And with this injected, of course, you also need to add the HTTP module to the app module, but we already did this in the messages section in the course, so no need to do it right now. So with that set up, in my sign up method here, I can return the observable I create. Remember, we're creating an observable when using Angular 2's HTTP service. And here I want to send a post request, of course, because I want to create a user, and we created a post route here in this user.js file. Now remember, the route we created here has a path of /, but invisibly, it has this /user in front of it, since this is the only way how we can get into this user.js file here. So therefore, the path or the URL I want to use here is localhost 3000 and then /user. Now with that, I'm connecting to this post route I just created. Of course, I also need to send some data to this request or with this request. So I need to add a body to this post request. So let me create a new body, and I will use the stringify function here to stringify the user we're passing to this function. So then it's time to pass this body. And as before, I need to attach some headers to let my backend know that we're getting JSON data. So time to also create new headers here. This is all the same I did in the messages section in this course. Of course, headers needs to be imported from @Angular HTTP. And here we pass a JavaScript object where we set the content type to application JSON like this. And then as a third argument, set up our headers here by adding the headers key and then our headers constant as a value. So with this, we're preparing this observable which holds the request we can send to the backend. But since no one has subscribed yet, we aren't sending it yet. So make sure to subscribe to it, though in this auth service method here, I won't subscribe yet. I will first add the map operator here to transform the data we get back. Remember, to make map work, we need to unlock these operators by importing rxjs/rx here at the top. This gives me access to map and all the other operators, and here I can then import or use the response, which needs to be imported from @Angular HTTP. And all I want to do here is I want to call response JSON to retrieve the, data which is sent with this request or with this response. And then I'll copy something from the message service, this catch block here, which allows me to catch any errors we might have. So just like this. This is the setup I want to use. Of course, observable here then also needs to be imported from rxjs. With this, we set up our sign up method in this service, of course, now we also need to use it in our sign up component to really, well, trigger this method whenever the user hits the sign up button. So let's head over to the sign up component here. In the onSubmit method, I want to reach out to my auth service. Now, for this to work, I first need to inject my auth service here. So private auth service of type auth service needs to be added here to get access to my auth service. Now, for this injection to work, I also need to provide the auth service though. You learned this in an earlier module in this course. The question, of course, is where do you want to provide the auth service? I could provide it in this component, but then I would get a separate instance for this component. This might be what I want, but is it what I want in this case? The auth service will be a service I want to use in other parts of the application too. Now I could create a single instance for this component, since signing up is not dependent on some data in the auth service. But I want to inject a single instance for my whole application, as I will later on also use the auth service in the messages feature, for example. Therefore, the place to inject this or to provide this auth service is in the app module. Here, I want to provide my service application-wide, which means I can use my auth service, the same instance of this auth service, in all components and all services everywhere I want in my whole application. To provide a service application-wide, I set up the providers array here in my app module. This means whatever I provide here is available in the whole app module here, and since I only have one app module, this means in the whole application. So here I will provide my auth service. Of course, you also need to import the auth service from ./auth.service. By the way, you also need to import it here in the sign up component. So make sure to add these two imports. And with that, this injection in the sign up component here will now work. And I will be able to inject this auth service in any other class, in any other service or component in my whole application, and I will always get the same instance. Now with that injected, time to not log what the user submitted, but instead to create a new user. So let's create a new user here. For this, we also need to import user from ./user_model from our own user model. And then we need to pass some data here. Now, what data does our user model expect? It expects the email, and then of course also password, first name, and so on. So to get the email, I can simply access my form here, and then the value of the form, and here the email field, since we set up an email field in our form value. So this is the convenient thing about this. The same is true for the password and basically for all other fields as well. We do have all these fields available, and I'm just restructuring this to make it easier to read, so to have it over multiple lines since we have a couple of fields here. So here we also will have as a third argument this my form value first name, and then as a last argument this my form value last name. So the names we're accessing here are the names of our controls we set up in the ng-on-init method down here. So this allows us to easily extract the data and create a new user using this data. The next step is to reach out to the auth service, and here I will call signup and pass my user to the signup method. Now, since this signup method returns an observable, I also need to subscribe to it, which now will send the request and allows me to listen to the data I get back. Now, the data I do get back, well, I only want to log it to the console to see if it works, and in case of an error, I will also simply error that to the console. With this setup, we should have a working setup which allows us to create new users. So let's have a look at the running application and see if this works. I will rebuild this application by running npm run build again. Also, I will restart my server, my Node.js server, because I made some changes there. And with that set up, let's now head over to the application, reload this page and open up the console to see if this works or if we get any errors. And then I can basically fill this out with any data you want to put in there and hit submit. This looks great. A new user was created, and we can check this in the Mongo shell client, where I can simply run dbusers find, and we see this user down here, which happens to have data we entered, and also notice that the password certainly is not what I entered. Instead, it's this encrypted value. Great. So this works as intended. With that, we're able to wire up, or with that, we're able to sign up users. Now, the next step, of course, is to use this new user to be able to sign him in the sign in form here.